Now I'm going to go into the introduction. It starts by talking about the core of a car, your brain being like a car, and addiction basically being a car where you can't pump the brakes on it. I think one of the most amazing things about addiction is that when we relapse, if we've had a period of sobriety long enough where we can have some conscious awareness of what's going on in our mind, and when it's not on total automatic mode, when we relapse, one of the most amazing things that happens is it's almost like we become consciously aware of the relapse in the middle of the relapse. It's almost like I'm in the car driving to get drugs, or I'm on my phone ordering drugs, or I'm driving towards the liquor store, or I'm like already taking steps towards the liquor store, and then I become consciously aware of that actually happening. And then it's like, oh wow, what's happening? I'm already sort of moving. Do I really want to do this? Oh, let me quickly turn off my brain before it convinces me not to. It's amazing how the brain acts so subconscious and automatic. And it talks here about how it can become stuck in go mode. And it talks at the bottom of the first page of the introduction about how your addicted brain says go. You need to use to cope. If you don't use, you'll fall apart. So what's interesting is they start by introducing this like dichotomy, this split of your addicted brain and who you are. Like your addicted brain and you. And then it goes on to really develop this concept of how you need to, like in the second paragraph of the second page, so page number 2, I guess technically it's the first paragraph, it says, there's a lot to learn about the addicted brain, and you will be an expert on your own addiction once you've read this book. So to be successful at this, it's all about outsmarting the addicted brain. We got this thing, this brain that's right 90% of the time, but that 5% of the time it's wrong, it ruins it for us. So we got to use 90% of the time to prepare for that 5%. When life happens, because life is going to happen, there's going to be a relationship issue, a work issue, there's going to be a work person that's going to drive us crazy, there's going to be a financial issue where like somehow the finances become stressful, there's going to be a relationship issue, there's going to be a relationship issue, that's for sure, whether it be a loss of a relationship or a disappointment in a relationship, and then that becomes stressful, and before we get the screw-its, we got to learn how to navigate that. And so the idea is to outsmart the addicted brain before it gets an urge, having things in place before that happens. It's kind of like werewolves, right? Werewolves, the moon comes out, they know like on the 30th day or when the full moon's out, they're going to become a werewolf. So they like lock themselves up in a cage before the moon hits, and they outsmart themselves. The moon happens and they become a wolf, and then they turn back the next day, and then they're able to become a human again and find themselves out of the locked cage. In a lot of ways, outsmarting the addicted brain is very similar to that, except we don't know when the full moon is going to be out. So it goes down to the second paragraph, which says, as strong as that intention and recognition might be at this moment, the urge to return to drinking or using can be equally, if not more powerful. So we go from like a monkey bar to another monkey bar to another monkey bar. At one moment we're really motivated to stay sober, and the next moment, you know, that can change. At the moments we're motivated and stable, we really got to plan for those moments, not hope that they don't come back, but really prepare for them coming back. It goes on to say it's that constant battle between the addicted part of our brain and the rational part of our brain. The end of that paragraph says, some addicts reject the experience of an urge itself, feeling that urges are a sign that something is wrong or that they are not recovering. When in reality, it goes on to say that urges are just a really natural part of recovery. It doesn't mean that we don't care. It doesn't mean that we're bad people. It doesn't mean that it's a signal that we're failing. It's not who we are. It's just a natural part of of recovery. Just because we have a strong urge to use again, that doesn't mean now somehow I don't care about my family, or I don't care about my future, or I don't care about my plans. It's just the addicted brain sending us a signal that we don't have to believe, or we don't have to answer. So urges and cravings are not a sign that things are going bad. It's a sign that we are recovering. It's a natural part of recovery. As you progress, urges almost become like a secondary emotion. When you start having urges, you start wondering, what's missing in my life? Because you might not be aware of the stress or aware of the rejection or the loneliness or whatever, but you might be really aware that all of a sudden I want to smoke weed, or all of a sudden out of the blue I need a drink. Like it just pops in your head like, I need a drink. That might be a secondary emotion to like, oh wow, I'm really stressed out at work, or oh wow, maybe that did sting, that rejection letter or that rejection that I got. And maybe talking through it, processing it, writing about it, talking to somebody about it can help to make it less strong. The next page, page 3, talks about who this book can help. So basically, anybody with an addiction. So it talks about alcohol and drug addictions, but it can absolutely work on behavioral addictions like pornography, gambling, and that's something you should keep an eye on. So many people will go through a series of addictions. So it'll go from one drug addiction to maybe a relationship addiction to another addiction, and then it just sort of we progressively get better and better. The second paragraph talks about the exercises in this workbook can be a part of your plan. So this doesn't replace therapy. It can be an adjunct to therapy, or you can use this book along with your therapist and say, let's go over this book together. This doesn't replace 12-step meetings. It absolutely encourages and endorses and supports 12-step meetings. So it's just one tool out of the many tools that all of us are using at this point. So page 4 talks about putting the techniques into practice. And it talks about the science, and it talks about specific titles of certain therapies that have been shown to be really helpful, like motivational techniques, cognitive behavioral techniques, which is basically like reasoning with yourself, playing the tape out, and using other forms of like logic and thinking through your cravings and addiction. And then the third is mindfulness techniques. So like, for example, the 12-step program, it talks about cultivating presence of a higher power. So those 3 things is what the techniques are that are discussed on page 4. There's one sentence here I thought was just beautiful. It's poetry. It's the second paragraph of this page, page 4. In the second paragraph, it says, grappling with your ambivalence is a good way to strengthen your motivation, especially when you have therapeutic tools to consider both sides of it in an intentional and systematic way. So I just thought this was so beautiful because, like, oftentimes we are too minded about using. I really want to stop, but I really want to use. That can be a conflict that confuses people, but that's a normal conflict. It's not an abnormal conflict. Again, not a signal that you're doing bad or you don't care or you're a bad person or how can I even have this thought. You don't want to like shame the thought and push it away. You want to bring it to light, actually. You want to bring it to light and you want to grapple it. Like some people, they get into a fight and they almost like deny that it's happening. And so what you want to do is you want to acknowledge that it's happening, either flight or fight. You want to run from it or you want to grapple with it. So grappling with your ambivalence is a good way to strengthen your motivation. So recognizing that ambivalence just meaning like you're too minded about wanting to use, that can happen early in recovery, that can happen later in recovery, that can happen way down the line in recovery, and it almost feels like you're grappling with it. You're just almost like two opposing forces just stuck. And then you start to think it out, or you call somebody, or you practice one of your tools and you get an upper edge, an upper hand. I just thought the way that the metaphor here was just so powerful. It talks about how motivation is very important. Obviously, people who are more motivated to recover do better, and motivation is something that you can strengthen. It's not something like you just get, like all of a sudden I'm just motivated or I'm not. Motivation's a muscle, and you can strengthen that muscle in order to succeed. So you want to increase your motivation. You want to increase your ability to grapple and logically think through cravings and addiction. And then you want to increase your mindfulness. Mindfulness just means like being aware of what's going on and not denying that these things are happening. Because a lot of what we do functions in the dark. And when we become mindful of it and see what it is, we cast some light on it, only then can we punching it in the face. It goes in page 5 to talk about the power of 12-step programs. So it pays homage to the 12-step programs. Like the study I told you about before, Cochrane reviews there's a type of review called a Cochrane review. What that simply means, it's one of the most rigorous types of review processes, because it just requires so many steps to get this review published. And there was a Cochrane review done on 12-step programs, where they reviewed all the literature on 12-step programs, all the studies on 12-step programs, and they found them to be effective. Keep that in mind. And then just the fact that they're available everywhere is an important tool. Does everybody agree with everything in 12-step programs? No. There's always stuff that people read in there and they're just like, this doesn't make sense. Some of the stuff you read it's like, what was this written in the... You can tell it was written a long time ago. But it talks about things that are helpful for all of us, and if it applies to you, you want to use it and work with it. So if it talks about stuff that's like religious and it sounds religious, you don't have to follow that stuff. There's a lot of stuff about character development. There's a lot of stuff on how to work through cravings, how to work on the self, that are really helpful. And then in regards to the power of it, there's just an incredible power to have a platform with people in recovery who can come together and work with each other. I need to see somebody with a year to let me know that this still works. It's possible. And somebody with a year still needs to see somebody with a month to see how far they've come and how insidious this is. And we all need to see the 15-year person who does it and then falls off, and recognize that you can, even after 15 years, fall off. That's very important to know. And then it goes on page 5, how to use this book. You can read that. It's pretty simple and straightforward. On page 6, it talks about, on a second paragraph, I think this is important. I was going to go into to part 1, but I'm just going to wrap up here because it's taken some time, so I think we'll wrap up in a few moments. But the second paragraph of page 6, which is the last part of this introduction, it talks about this struggle as part of the hand you've been dealt in life as someone vulnerable to the disease of addiction. So, yeah, I mean, we'd all love to have another struggle or another problem. But, this is essentially what we've been dealt. And, the sooner we acknowledge it and the sooner that we start to work out and build ourselves up against it, the sooner we can become successful at it. To overcome it successfully, you will undoubtedly experience discomfort, frustration, vulnerability, tension, and at times, even hopelessness. The key is to keep at it and never give up. And that's why it's helpful to be in a group. Because if you're doing your time in a rehab or sober living home or whatever, and you're just trying to check some list off, check the probation officer, parole officer list off, or the parents list off, or the spouse list off, sure, stay quiet, go through the motions, do your thing. But if you're really grappling with how am I going to stay sober for forget the rest of our life. That's hard. That's a hard thing to imagine. How am I going to stay forward for the next day, for the next week, for the next month? That's all you have to worry about. You don't have to worry about the rest of your life. How am I going to do that? You're going to experience that discomfort, frustration. It's going to be hard. That's how you know. And then you get a year, you realize, you can tell very quickly somebody who is working on a program or not. Because somebody on a working on a program or working towards a recovery, they're working. It's hard work. Look, medical school, getting a certificate and some sort of professional experience, getting a black belt, you can't get that unless you work. You got to work at it in order to get there. And if you're that person with the black belt, you can tell if somebody is going to be able to progress just by a few moments with them to see if they're working or not. All right, so the point being is that this requires work. And then finally, the last paragraph, and this is where we'll end, is these techniques are designed to arm you with a range of effective tools for managing your addiction. But you will not necessarily find each of them to be equally helpful. Everybody's got their own fighting style. Some people have a really powerful punch. Some people don't have a powerful punch, but they move. Muhammad Ali said something like, he was going up against, I want to say Joe Frazier, I can't remember who it was, and they said, he's got a really strong punch. What are you going to do? And he said, well, he's got to land that punch in order for it to work. And Muhammad Ali was quick. So everybody's got their own fighting style based on their own framework, based on their own family situation, their life situation, their own economic situation, their own social situations. You got to find all the tools that are available and then find what makes sense for you. But this is a scrappy street fight, and if people want to make it, they got to work hard and fight and find the tools that are effective to make it happen, and persistence is key. And this workbook, the second to last sentence is, this workbook can be helpful to you regardless of whether you are in treatment. So let's get on the road to your recovery and begin this healthy new chapter of your life. And that ends the introduction. And then the next part is understanding addictive behaviors. So there's 2 chapters, and then there's the second part. So there's 2 parts. One part is understanding your addiction, and the second part is how do you overcome your addiction. So in order to overcome the addiction, it's really important to have a really good working knowledge of what is addiction. If you don't know your enemy, then it will overcome you. You want to know what the weak points of your enemy are. If you go up against an army, you might feel that it's impenetrable, invincible. But if you study your enemy, you start to notice weak points, and you start to realize everybody bleeds. Everything has a weak point. And once you start figuring that out, then you start to make progress. And you got to really know your enemy in order for this to work and for you to be successful.